As we approach 150 years since the father of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, made that famous first telephone call to his assistant Thomas Watson, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the father of the cell phone, Marty Cooper, inventor of the cell phone and the first person to ever make a public call with a handheld portable telephone 50 years ago. Marty, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here, Alex.
Let's get straight in. Looking back at life in the 1970s, a life without the cell phone, without the internet, without personal computers, we did have hardwired telephones everywhere and car phones were starting to appear. But what made you so sure that people everywhere would one day want to also own a handheld portable phone?
Well, Alex, I was working for Motorola at the time. Motorola made a number of products, but the most profitable product, the one that was most successful for us, were two-way radios. I don't know what you call them in the UK, but these are the radios that the bobbies use, firefighters and businesses, anybody that wants to control assets that are on the move. Uh, I hear a funny noise. Did you hear that?
Sorry?
There's a funny noise.
We must be, maybe it's the radio interference. um,
Somebody
let me
does.
let let me mute.
Well, if you don't hear it, then we can just keep going.
Did it stop when I muted?
It's stop. It doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, all right.
All right, let's start that whole thing over again.
It's okay. I like it a little bit rough, so we can just keep going. It's funny
Okay,
that we're talking about technology and radio
yeah,
frequencies, and here we are having a problem.
of course. I just as a incidental comment, I still have a lot of trouble working my cell phone, so
You're
I'm
you're you're not alone.
very familiar with technological difficulties. So we were in the two-way radio business, and two-way radios were, for the most part, built into cars. And then we started to make handheld devices, and we found out that this was a whole different world. That the experience of talking on a wired telephone is calling a place. When you, when you use a handheld device like a cell phone, I guess you call them mobile phones in the UK, you are calling a person. Very different experience. And it was obvious to us that the future was not calling places, it was calling people. Because technology, as we discussed before this session started, is meaningless without the human element. I've been preaching that for 60 years, and I believe it fervently. There are too many people focused on technology for the sake of technology, and I think that's a worthless occupation.
But presumably, in reading your book, uh, this wasn't a well-known everybody needs to move mobile kind of a narrative. You must have presumably had some pushback and people saying, it'll never catch on. It's a bad idea. We're not there. So what was it specifically that really just made you believe that this is going to happen?
Well, our specific motivation didn't have anything to do with this. The things we're talking about. It had to do with uh, uh, amazingly enough, the idea of cellular communications, of having reuse of the radio spectrum within a given area, actually came up at Bell Laboratories, which was named after guess who? And, and these fellows at Bell Labs, who I became friendly with, as a matter of fact, in 1947 wrote a memo, and they pointed out that it was possible to have many different they didn't call themselves at the time, but many different areas. They drew these circles showing how you could use a frequency in one spot and then use that same frequency over again. And they said, well, this is an interesting idea. It's not very original. And they put it into their file cabinet. And 22 years later, the uh, uh, Bell system, once again, this guy Bell is pervasive, must have thumbed through this file cabinet. They decided that they were going to create a new service called cellular communications. And they decided that this was going to be car telephones. They were going to put these devices in cars, and that there was not going to be much of a business. They thought that they hired an outfit called McKinsey Consultants, and the consultants said, uh, uh, "Yes, we have studied this problem, and there will be, we think, ultimately, as many as 1 million people in the world who will have these uh, car telephones." And it turns out they were right. The maximum market in the world for car telephones was about 1 million. As you know, Alex, there are more than 8 billion uh, mobile phones in the world today, and more than 60%, 2/3 of the population of the world are using mobile phones. But it's because these are personal phones. The mobile phone has become an extension of the person. It provides all kinds of capabilities for, well, we'll discuss all the different things you could do with a mobile phone, but the most important is communicating with other people.
Was there
So you were talking about why did we get interested in this? Well, the Bell system said, first of all, because of this small market, we want a monopoly. And we were very much opposed, and I am, to monopolies. And the second thing they said is because this market is so small, we would like to also have the ability for this monopoly to use two-way radios, which was in essence saying that we, in a competitive business, were going to be competing with a monopoly. We didn't like that idea very much at all. And so we decided to take the Bell system on and persuade our regulators. In the case of the U.S., it's called the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and persuade them of two things. First of all, that whatever business there was going to be, it ought to be competitive. And the second was that the time for car telephones had long passed, that the time was, we were now ready for personal communications, the ability for a phone to be identified with a person. And when you called somebody, you would get them directly, and you were not just calling a place.
and that rivalry obviously ran through that entire period, leading up to that call, of course, April the 3rd, 1973, standing on 6th Avenue in New York and making the first ever cell phone call. And you dial Joel Engel, I believe, who was a counterpart at AT&T. And in your book, you mentioned that he was an outspoken critic, actually, of the work that you were doing over at Motorola. You also refer to yourself as a dreamer in the book, and continue to say that there is rarely a eureka moment with inventions. But the story of the Dynatac prototype, which was that first telephone that you produced, being assembled in just under 90 days, leading to this public cell phone call to your rival to help battle against this monopoly. Well, it kind of sounds like a eureka moment to me. How did you pull it off?
Well, first of all, I had some great supporters. The and the management of Motorola believed very strongly in the concept of innovation, of new things happening, and they gave me the right to go throughout the company and find all the latest technologies. And so I went to our semiconductor division, to our military division, uh, and found all kinds of technologies that were not yet mature. They were still in the research laboratories, and we reached out to those people and got uh, well, any number of breakthroughs. This photo we made, there it is.
There it is. Wow.
You, if I put it this way, you'll think that the thing is huge, and it actually is huge. So you can see this thing weighs 2 kilos. Or actually 1 kilo. I'm exaggerating now, and you can see how big it is. It had a battery life of about 20 minutes of talking time. That was not a problem at all because this thing was so heavy you couldn't hold it up for more than 20 minutes. But uh, there were a number of breakthroughs we had to do in that 90 days. First of all, up until then, a typical two-way radio would have perhaps two or three, maybe a half a dozen channels. And this thing had over 400 channels. The mobile phone that you use today has literally thousands of channels. And the only way you do that is with large scale integrated circuits. And those things had not been invented yet. Our semiconductor division was still working on early models. We got them to make a processor for us that could do these 400 channels. Even the antenna looks very simple, but this was at a frequency that had never been used before. This phone had to talk and listen at the same time. Nobody had done that before, especially at 900 megahertz. Uh, the phone had to talk and listen at the same time. As you know, when the bobbies talk on their mobile phones, when they want to talk, they push a button, and then they have to release the button so they can listen. All those things were really difficult problems, but we put together a team of people. We reached out throughout the corporation to find these new technologies. People worked day and night, and from the starting point, which was actually in November, is when I first approached the person who was going to do the industrial design, the shape of this thing. Uh, and his name was Rudy Krolop. I said, Rudy, I want you to build a cell phone. He said, what's a cell phone? And I said, I looked over at the phone on his desk and I grabbed a pair of scissors and I cut the cord off the phone and told him, well, see that? That is a cell phone, no wire. Uh, uh, he put together a team of people. They came up with four or five different designs. They predicted every different kind of model you could imagine: folding phones, sliding phones, a capsule phone. All of them more clever than this one, but this one was simple. And the one thing we did not need with this major challenge we had was a complicated phone. So by the beginning of the year, I had uh, called upon the actual designers that had to put together the complicated circuitry involved in this. And that's when this project started. And by March 31st, we actually had a working phone. On April 3rd, as you mentioned, on the streets of New York, we actually made the very first public call.
Yeah, an incredible story. And it then obviously took some time before the phones actually were released and were available commercially to the market. Partly, as I understand it, the back and forwards with the FCC, who eventually ruled that AT&T couldn't have the desired monopoly.
Sure, Alex. Building a single phone like that was a great achievement, but only a small distance toward actually commercially making this thing so that you could have more than one working. When we made that first call in New York, there was only one thing in my mind, and it was not this marvelous industry that was going to start. It's whether this damn phone would work in the first place. It was a conglomeration hand wired together by these clever engineers. So uh, it was at least 5 or 6 years before we could actually reproduce this. And the battle with the bell system was just starting. They did not give up easily. And in fact, that battle was not really resolved till the late 1970s when the FCC finally made up their minds.
And then the period after that, you eventually left Motorola in 1983, I believe,
That's correct.
um, to start your journey as an entrepreneur, building businesses in the cellular industry, um, including several ventures with your wife, Arlene. I wonder if you can just reflect on what that really meant for the industry, being opened up in that way and allowing competitors to enter the market and produce products, and just reflect perhaps on what might have happened if the FCC decided to give AT&T that monopoly in the first place.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind, Alex, that if AT&T had prevailed, we would just now be getting into the personal communications business. And the reason is very simple. When you build the system, if you built the system for car telephones, it would have been a very different system than what we have today. Think about it, that when you're in a car, when the Bell system, Bell Laboratories people drew this picture, it was two-dimensional. They showed these circles and had cars driving between the circles, and we live in a three-dimensional world, don't we? And so when you went up in an elevator, the whole concept of what communications was changed. You had to reduce the power. We won't get into the technical details, but the system would have been built for car telephones, and converting that to a portable system would have been a huge expenditure, and it would have. It's inevitable that we would have had handheld phones, but it would have taken at least 10 or 20 years longer for the cellular revolution to occur.
Mm. And so leaving Motorola and moving on into that entrepreneurial stage, was it, can you describe what it was like? Was it a golden age of the industry? And was there a specific moment that you realized that your dream of everybody owning a cell phone was actually happening and was going to come true?
No, well, I hate to disillusion you, but but I really do believe that there are no magic eureka moments, because it took 10 years for people to realize that this was going to be a big industry. The first phones in 1973, first of all, you saw how huge they were. They were very expensive. They didn't work very well because the coverage was not what it is today. Even today, there are places where you try to make a phone call and you can't do it because there's no signal. So it took at least 10 years before the world realized that this was going to be pervasive, that someday everybody, in fact, we told the joke that someday when you were born, you would be assigned a phone number. If you didn't answer the phone, you had died. Think about it, we're almost there today. But as you point out, it took quite a while before people realized that this was a revolution, not just a new product.
And so moving on a little bit further, you mentioned in the book that by the millennium, Motorola's cellular mojo, as you call it, had gone and the business had lost its way. Can you expand on what happened briefly at Motorola? And again, you describe it as Nokia and Ericsson eating Motorola's lunch. Can you give any insight into what may have happened? Because from the outset, it sounds like it was the boom years. And growing up as I did, I was born in 1986. Growing up and experiencing that world without mobiles and witnessing the first internet lines coming into the house and moving from a plugged in phone into those dial-up 56K modems and everything that came after that, it feels like it should have been a real sort of boom, boom time. But you mentioned in the book that Motorola really struggled.
Well, it was a boom time for Motorola at the beginning. Motorola had virtually all of the market. There were competitors building up, but Motorola was the leader in the technology. They built most of the phones. They came up with the Razor, which is the first folding phone. And the only way you could describe what happened at that point was sheer arrogance. They thought they owned the world, that they could control not only the marketplace, but the technology, including the method by which the mobile communications were transmitted. The concept of the first mobile phones were analog. That may not mean a lot to your constituency, but analog meant that you were actually dealing with frequencies in an analog form. Digital technology was just being evolved then, but digital technology in many ways was far superior, and especially for the miniaturization, which is so important. And Motorola resisted that. They tried to persuade the world that analog phones would last, the concept would last longer, uh, and tried to use their leadership to move the world in directions the world should not have gone in. And as a result of that, the first people that came up were Nokia. And Nokia's contribution was very simple. They just made a very simple phone at lower cost. They produced it in huge volumes, and Motorola slowly saw its leadership dissipating. We went through succeeding uh, uh, generations of digital technology, from TDMA to CDMA, a whole alphabet soup of different technology. We're up to now the fifth generation, and people are working on the sixth generation. Uh, so Motorola just got left behind. They were ultimately Motorola. It was purchased by Google, who sold them to a Chinese company, Lenovo. But believe it or not, Alex, Motorola is still out there, and much of the development is being done not in China, but still back in the U.S. I actually spoke to the Motorola R&D facility in Chicago, in the U.S. There are still some employees there, believe it or not, who work for the old Motorola, and they in fact are producing some very interesting phones. They don't have a big share of market, but their phones are absolutely fascinating. So Motorola still survives in a small way. But the next big thing that happened after Nokia, and as you pointed out, Ericsson, is that Steve Jobs came along. He didn't do very much in the way of technology, but he came up with the idea of putting a lot of smarts in this phone. But more important like that, he did not innovate that. What he innovated was an air interface, a way that you could look at this thing and control things by touching a screen and accessing not only speaking and listening, not only texting, but what we could now call applications, to do numerous other functions. They made that phone a valuable tool, and that really escalated the growth of mobile communications.
I remember pre iPhone, you were starting to get PDAs, the handheld sort of very basic touchscreen, but the PDAs. I remember Nokia had was it the 9110 or it was their communicator. It was kind of a big thing that flipped open and had a keyboard, and then obviously the BlackBerry phones. So some of those technologies were obviously, you had WAP, what the wireless, what was it, wireless something protocol. You obviously know far more than I do, but I remember back then being able to access very basic sort of web pages and information on some of those earlier devices long before the iPhone came out and was introduced. So what was it from a design and I suppose you've already mentioned it wasn't necessarily technologically revolutionary, but what was it about the iPhone that seemed to just have this dominating effect on the market and really, change things up a notch?
Well, the interesting thing about the iPhone, if you think about it, Alex, when you buy one, uh, there's no instruction manual. Do you ever notice that? It's because theoretically, at least, it's intuitive. You want to get access to the internet, you push a button, and somehow you're on the internet and you type a few letters. That was not Steve Jobs' innovation. It was Vid Cerf and Bob Kahn, a few other people that invented the internet. So the smartphone took advantage of the internet. It took advantage of the technology of a touch screen, where you could just touch icons and make things happen. And that was Steve Jobs' contribution. So making it easy to use, giving a person access to all the knowledge of the world, those things were absolutely marvelous when they happened. And that is what stimulated the huge growth of the industry that happened 2000 and beyond.
So it's really about, and Steve Jobs was famous for this, putting the user and the person first, rather than being obsessed by the technology and what you can do to the phone, rather than solving a problem for a person.
Yeah, of course. He didn't invent the humanity thing. I have to remind you, that was my invention. Naturally, I want you to know I did not arrange for this phone call to happen. It
If
was,
you need to take it, you take it.
it was, it was accidental. I apologize. There is a little button on this thing that allows me to shut off the ringer, but I didn't push the right button.
um, and then obviously from that point onwards, we became. I mean, people say it was the iPhone that really led this march of obsession with devices, and I think it certainly contributed. But I remember, before the iPhone, we were obsessed with phones back then. Playing the little snake game on those early Nokias was incredible. People would spend hours and hours and hours trying to beat that score, or to try and rewrite a text message because you only had a certain number of characters in those early days, and one message. You couldn't send multiple messages. So it seems like the march of technology was already happening, and then we land into today. And in the book, you mention about the COVID-19 pandemic, which the book was being written, in the early stages of that. And you mentioned in the book that the pandemic enabled a toe to have been inserted into the privacy door that's unlikely to ever be removed. It sounds sort of uncharacteristically positive from you. So I wondered if you could just touch on what you really meant by that and what the implications are today. And I guess whether that toe is still there, whether it's now a foot and a leg and everything else.
Well, Alex, we have given away our privacy. There isn't any privacy anymore. Just the fact that when you every time you use your mobile phone, somebody knows that. Somebody is accumulating information about you. And so it's hard to imagine. But if you lose your phone now, uh, uh, somebody who has analyzed the information knows that you have lost it and can pretty much know who found it just by looking at their mobile phone habits. Whoops. Well,
we're still good. We're still
computer.
good.
Oh my goodness, my monitor turned off and it turned back on. Somebody's. You must have an enemy who has turned me off and turned me back on. So, so somehow we haven't lost our privacy. We just put it away. And it's a major battle now to recover at least part of that, to keep our secrets to ourselves and to keep people from defrauding us by pretending that they're us. And it's not getting better, it's getting worse. As you know, we now have artificial intelligence where somebody can actually create an avatar of you and make you speak in other languages and say anything they want you to say. So we have got some serious problems to contend with. Fortunately, the benefits of having mobile phones and having the capability of being able to reach not only for every person in the world, but for every piece of information in the world is so valuable that we are going to solve the privacy problem, but it is a very serious problem.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to balance. You know, you said many times that if we can't sit next to one another, then a phone call is the next best thing. And clearly, being able to communicate as we are doing, you know, many miles apart, is fantastic. But there is a lot of negativity around how much time we spend on our devices, the risks, the privacy risks, the dangers of AI and exploitation. The fact that our kind of phones and digital obsessions are replacing those traditional methods of communication. Um, are those concerns really valid? And I think to some extent you've already answered that in the risks to privacy. But who's really to blame, and who should really be taking responsibility for that? And is it the cell phone that's the problem, or is it something else?
Alex, there's nothing unique about the cellular industry. We went through this with personal computers. We went through, believe it or not, with television. In the early days of television, people were rapt. First of all, playing games on television, and then watching ridiculous programs all night long. Do you remember wrestling on
I was a
television?
huge fan. I was a huge fan of
So,
of wrestling.
so after 40 or 50 years, we are still, believe it or not, in early days of the mobile phone. We're just learning how to use it. We're learning how to get around its defects. The idea of the app that I talked to you about before, uh, Samsung and Apple build most of the mobile phones in the world, and they want them all to be the same because it's easy to manufacture. And they say, well, you can personalize the phone. All you have to do is pick the right apps. Of course, there are 4 million apps available on the iPhone, another 4 million uh, for the Android phones. Uh, how do you do that? How do you select an app? So we know that we're just at the very beginning of the practical use of a mobile phone. In the future, there will be in every mobile phone an artificial intelligence, and that intelligence will examine your behavior and it will go and find the right app for you. And if there isn't an app available, it will create one for you. Remember, the purpose of technology is to make your life better, not more complicated, which I think today's mobile phones really do to an excess. So, but the most important thing that's going to happen in the future, and I think you were leading up to that, uh, the future mobile phone is not going to be anything like the modern phone because there are some applications coming that are really life changing. And I mean, use the word life advisedly. Uh, if you think about it, we are now starting to measure all kinds of things on the human body. We are very quickly learned how to measure simple things like your pulse and your uh, uh, blood pressure, uh, all kinds of the number of steps that you're taking, how fast you're breathing. We're getting to the point now very soon that we'll be able to measure your glucose without punching a hole in your body so you have blood. So we have the concept today, I'm sure you have in the UK, of the annual physical examination, which is totally worthless because diseases don't wait for your annual physical. They happen at some point in time, and it usually will be the day after you have your physical. So the cell phone is going to be capable of doing a physical examination every minute. And so when there is the onset of a disease, you know it before it becomes a disease. And modern technology can't do it today, but it's going to happen in the future. We'll be able to zap any disease and stop it before it becomes a disease, even within a few generations. And by the way, that's my time scale. It's not going to happen tomorrow. We'll be able to sense a few cancer cells and zap those cells. And the only way you're going to die is if you get on a motorcycle and run into another car. So that I think is going to be a major revolution in the future. The whole idea of people being able to collaborate, as you and I are doing right now, is going to increase the efficiency of production of anything. And the concept of poverty is going to disappear. There's no excuse for anybody going hungry today. We're producing more food that we ever had in history. We haven't figured out how to distribute that food equitably, but that problem is unquestionably going to be solved, and we've already demonstrated that. The United Nations did a study over a period of 20 to 25 years in the past. Over 1 billion people have moved out of severe poverty, largely because of the availability of mobile phones. So that's really meaningful that we are getting to the point where the goods that we're creating will be distributed equitably. There won't be poverty anymore, and the world will be a much better place. But in order for that to happen, we need a more educated populace, and the concept of education, especially in the early years, is going to be really revolutionized. The whole idea, Alex, of having a teacher stand up and lecture somebody for an hour who has a mobile phone that can access all the information in the world is kind of ludicrous. The whole role of what a teacher does is going to change. Teachers will have more time to teach us about ethics, philosophy, the important things of life. And when it comes to information, the teachers will teach us how to access the information. We're going to educate ourselves, and we are going to become, our children are already smarter than we are, and their children will be still smarter. And hopefully, a more intelligent populace will figure out that warfare is stupid and we're not going to have any wars anymore. Now you really know that I'm a dreamer, right?
I think it's a dream that um, anybody would find it very difficult to argue against, and it's certainly a dream I'm on board with. But bringing it back today, specifically around education, most schools have a policy to ban phones outright. They claim that they're just distractions in the classroom. They cause bullying and problems with relationships, and a lot of schools, will literally ban them off the premises. What do you think needs to happen to unlock the minds in education? to demonstrate and open the doors to this technology to have the benefits that you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, I've already discovered what you just said about schools and teachers. Two of my grandchildren are teachers now, and their comment, and remember, they're talking to their grandpa. They can't stand cell phones. They wish could be forbidden. Uh, and with today's system, they're probably right. But somehow they are the ones that have to change, and that those changes are happening today. They what you find now is lots of collaboration where the teachers teach, they give children guidance, and they assign them problems that they have to solve themselves, that they have to collaborate with others. And in all of those cases, the cell phone is an extremely valuable tool. So it's the teachers that have to accommodate. Uh, do they have a problem with the students? Well, of course. But do you think that when you went to school, that kids weren't floating paper airplanes around the room, sending messages to each other? Kids were shooting spitballs through straws at each other. Those problems haven't changed. It's just the nature of the tools that are changed. The, the educational system is in the process of revolution. It's going to accommodate, and the result will be a lot smarter people. And it's not going to be easy, but the world will be a better place.
Just looking at specifically the form factor of the cell phone, if you had to put a date on it, when do you think the next major change in that form factor is going to occur? And what's the technology that's going to really drive that? So that we had the sort of the iPhone, we had the Dynatac moment, we've had the iPhone moment. What's going to be the next moment?
Well, you're quite right in the fact that we've gone about as far as we can go. You can't miniaturize this thing anymore because your fingers are of whatever size they are, and you can't make the icons any smaller. But little by little, you find out that this is a suboptimal device. Just think about it. Think about speech. When I call you up, I have to take this phone, hold it up in this really uncomfortable position for a long time. I have to charge the battery. And none of those things is intuitive. So, take that as an example about making phone calls. People still do that, you know. Uh, we the optimum phone is embedded under your skin, under your ear, probably because it's close to where you want the sound to go in. It's got a very powerful computer. You know what that is? It's just a little chip stuck under your skin as well. And if I want to talk to you, I say, get Alexander Graham Bell on the phone for me. And they say, which one do you want? The one that died 150 years ago or the one in the UK? And I say, get me Alex in the UK. And next thing you know, I'm talking to you. To me, that's an optimum phone. Well, maybe not quite optimum. Maybe I should just be able to think of you or think of your image and there you are talking to me. But that may be a little too futuristic. So to me, that is the optimum phone. Did you notice that this phone didn't require charging? Why is that? Because your body is nothing more than a power supply. You ingest food, the food that gets processed, it creates energy. We can tap off a little of that energy to run these chips that are sitting underneath your skin. Uh, the other functions that a cell phone does similarly will be optimized. When you access the internet, you're going to do that through goggles so that you can not only get the words, but you can see images, moving images, and possibly, not possibly, assuredly, three dimensional. So now you're going to be wearing glasses, and ultimately, those lenses will be embedded into your eyeballs. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? But I have artificial lenses in both my eyes, and they work much better than the originals did. Which, by the way, is true with practically every joint in my body now. But we won't get into that. So what we're going to find is that the cell phone is going to be distributed around your body. It's going to be sensors on your body that are measuring your uh, 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 medical characteristics. It's going to be the vision. It's going to be ways of generating power. So I wouldn't presume to tell you precisely what it will be, but the idea is that you will have on your body a, a, a device which connects you to the world, and that device will collect information from various parts of your body to optimize everything that you do. You'll be able to do these things without barely thinking about them, instead of looking around to look at this cluttered display with all kinds of icons, page after page of icons where it really is troublesome. All that's going to go away. The cell phone will become a very simple, intuitive device that is there for only one purpose: to make your life better.
So there's the two things I'd like to pick up on there. There seems to be a very big barrier to entry to that concept, which is the invasiveness of technology and taking on technology biologically almost into your body. Do you absolutely believe that that will happen, or do you believe that there'll be a pushback against it? And do you, as a follow up question to that, taking once that happens, it seems like that could be the cliff edge, the moment that we're talking about that could then allow these technologies to really move at pace into the types of features that you're talking about. Once that sort of roller coaster and momentum starts to build, we're actually starting to potentially become less human. And that seems to be the crossover that you talk about in the book about human 2.0 and human 3.0. And I just wondered, just would love to hear your thoughts on the fact that as a starting piece, and you and I both share um, a similar belief in that technology should be about the people and the human and the benefits. Um, Once the technology starts to overtake biologically what it means to be a human, do you have any thoughts on that?
That really, we're getting beyond technology, aren't we, Alex? About what is humanity. So first of all, let me say that the kinds of things that we're talking about now are generational. You and your generation and my generation will never understand this transition that's occurring. But also think about the fact that the cell phone can hear better than you can, it can see better than you can, and it can process information faster than you can. So the idea that you will not use these capabilities in the future to make your life better is ludicrous. Of course, you're going to use them. And as you use them, more and more of what you insist on calling humanity is going to be transferred over to this phone. And humanity, I guess, I was just on another podcast, believe it or not, last week, done by the Marconi Society, of which I'm a member. And the, I was a speaker, the inventor of the internet was a speaker, and the inventor of the digital processor was there. And his conviction is the machines will never take over because the machines don't have soul and heart. And much as I don't want to get into this esoteric thing about what is heart and what is soul, uh, there are things that humanity can do that machines will not be able to do in the foreseeable future. The brain, the central nervous system of a human being is extraordinarily complex. If we tried to reproduce just the number of devices, the human brain would be the size of an aircraft carrier, and it wouldn't work because it would take too long for information to get from the bow to the stern. So we don't know how to reproduce the human brain yet. We don't even understand. Uh, we don't even understand how the brain works. So it's going to be generations and generations, but little by little, we are going to be dependent on the fact that machines do almost everything that we do more effectively than we do. What we have is the ability to integrate these things and to make the things that we do useful and in the interest of humanity, of mankind. So I am not trying to foist these principles out of other people. And in fact, from a practical viewpoint of humanity, as you and I are discussing now, we'll not even notice this change. It's going to happen so slowly. But we're already so dependent on these devices, it's not going to slow down, it's going to keep increasing. And will there be Luddites? Of course. I think you Brits invented the idea of what a Luddite is. There are all kinds of people that resist new technologies. They don't last very long. The technology is going to take over at some point. And whether the machines will take over, as I predicted in the book, is I would say I'm starting to lean toward that's very unlikely. That at least for many, many generations in the future, humanity will be in control. Uh, if you go enough generations in the future, assuming we haven't destroyed ourselves, which is probably the highest probability, I would say that it's inevitable that the machines will take over, and let's hope that they treat us in a very friendly way when they do that.
So, just bringing it back to today, we talked about education and the potential benefits that today's technologies could revolutionize and really benefit education, and the implications therefore on poverty reduction and health benefits. But we seem obsessed as consumers of these devices that we want more and more, and the manufacturers and designers of these devices seem to want to give us more and more. But does the world really need another iPhone right now? Or should it be focused on improving access to an implementation of the technology that we already have?
Well, among all the intelligent things you said on our cast, that's probably the most intelligent thing, Alex. You already noticed that this is an iPhone 14. I also have an Android, the latest version of Android. The incremental improvements are getting smaller and smaller. I mean, having a more and more pixels, you don't notice the more pixels because your eyes can't accommodate them. So we're already running into the barrier of we're losing interest in new generations. In fact, the newspaper that I read this morning said that the computer manufacturers, the chip manufacturers are in trouble now because they're selling fewer cell phones. The cell phones are lasting longer, and so we are learning that. The engineers haven't quite got caught up with that yet. Uh, we have a new thing called the Internet of Things, and that is going to happen. That we've built this huge network now that connects every person with every other person. There's no reason why we can't connect everything, every generating plant of electricity, every user of electricity, and control all of these things much more effectively than we're doing today. But I think that much of that effort is misplaced. I think the biggest problems we have today is not the Internet of Things, it's the Internet of People. We haven't finished that job yet. And I am on a advisory committee to our Federal Communications Commission. And I've got a bunch of techies who are working on the Internet of Things, and I keep telling them, keep going, guys, but let's not forget about people. We've got some huge people, human people, not the least of which are poverty and warfare. Don't you think we ought to solve those problems first before we get into connecting every switch in our homes, which, by the way, I'm already doing, but I like to think I'm a little ahead of the rest of humanity. And let's solve the problems of human beings, make people's lives better. That's what technology is supposed to do. And I'm hoping that we can put some pressure on our technology people to slow down the technology for the sake of technology and get it back to technology solves the problems of humans, that makes humans' lives better. Sounds like I'm on a podium lecturing, lecturing about how the future is not lectures. It's people learning by being on the internet. But once in a while, us lecturers have to have their moments.
Absolutely. And just as a final question, just to finish up, looking back on your career, on everything that you've learned and experienced, what's the one piece of advice that you would give to the dreamers of tomorrow?
The when I joined Motorola, one of the things that they taught me was the statement of the founder, uh, uh, Paul Galvin, who was an entrepreneur. I know I'm wasting your time, but I'm going to tell you about Paul Galvin's first invention. Was a heater for automobiles. This was back in the 1920s, and automobiles did not have heaters. They didn't have radios. They didn't. They were just boxes on wheels. They didn't even have windows. And so he came up with this heater that would heat up cars, and he raised the money, start building these things, put them in cars, and then they started exploding, and that took care of his heater business. So he went into another business, and then a third, and his third business was putting radios into cars, and that's where the name Motorola came from, and it was very successful. And so he encapsulated his experience with one thing that I'm passing on to you. Uh, do not fear failure. Reach out. And I took his comments very seriously. It turns out that Motorola, the corporation, uh, took it very seriously. I've had my shares of failures, Alex, and I wouldn't do any one of them over again. It turns out that you learn from failures. And if you do learn, you have successes. And that combination is a great way to run your life. So, to repeat, if I had advice for your constituency, I would tell them reach out, do not fear failure.
Thank you. And on that note, Marty, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and just hearing your thoughts. And I would absolutely recommend everybody to grab a copy of your book as well, because that encapsulates some of the things we've talked about today.
Well, thank you, Alice. It's been a great pleasure. You're a superb interviewer. You say things much better than I do. So good luck to you, and it has been a pleasure to be with you.